Russian President Vladimir Putin has removed Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu in a major cabinet shakeup coinciding with the start of the fifth term. Well, this marks the first major military shakeup in the country's security cabinet since its invasion of Ukraine. And to talk more on this, we're now being joined by James Jackson, journalist and analyst in Germany and CE Europe, and he's joining us live from Berlin. Thank you so much for taking our time and joining us here on WION, Mr. Jackson.
Thanks for having me.
Now, Russian President Vladimir Putin has replaced his Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu and appointed him as the Secretary of the Security Council. What kind of bearing will this have in Russia's war with Ukraine, as this is one of the most major changes that Putin has made since Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022?
It is absolutely a big change. I think more than getting rid of Shoigu, who was, for many Russians, the face of the war alongside Vladimir Putin, the important announcement is the appointment of Andrei Belousov as the new Minister of Defense. Belousov was formerly an economic expert, an economist, and the Deputy Prime Minister in charge of Russia's economy. Now, if we were to look at the economy, how the war and how the economy are going for Russia in the last 2 years, I think we can say that actually the war went far worse than expected for Russia and for the world, with the second largest military in the world exposed as nowhere near as powerful as people thought, whereas actually the Russian economy has been proven to be a lot more resistant to the kind of sanctions that the West thought might bring it to its knees and cause many problems. So Belousov played a role of that in isolating Russia, and actually living standards have not dropped by anywhere near the amount that people expect. Reporters say that life in Moscow and other areas is effectively has returned to what it was before. So what we're seeing here is the Kremlin digging in for a long war. They've realized that they're going to win in Ukraine, not by the strength of their army or their tactics, but by economic forces, by being able to outproduce Ukraine. Shoigu was unable to keep his army in check. There have been corruption allegations. There was, of course, the small Wagner rebellion. But what the Kremlin have seen is that this is going to cost a lot of money, but they are signaling their willingness to spend that money by appointing Belousov.
Right, Mr. Jackson, the Kremlin has described the cabinet overhaul as a part of a strategy to align the defense ministry's operations more closely with the broader economic needs of the country. How do you assess that statement coming out of the Kremlin?
Exactly as I said, the Kremlin have realized that their way that they're going to win this war is by outproducing. They mentioned in the statement that they're now approaching the amount of money spent on the military in the budget of the mid-'80s, when we were in a huge block competition between the Soviet Union and the West, arms race. And I think they're actually signaling that they're willing to get back to that. And we might see a new arms race between the West and Russia, and they're signaling their willingness and readiness to contribute to that and to win that arms race. So I think observers in the West should actually be worried about this appointment, because it's not just a continuation of the arguably failing Russian war strategy. It's shows that they're open to innovating, getting rid of a very senior, well-connected minister, Shoigu, who was sometimes seen as a potential challenger to Putin, and actually replacing him with more of a technocratic figure could be something very powerful for Russia.
Just to follow up on that, Mr. Jackson, how do you assess Putin's decision of choosing an economist, a civilian, for the role of the defense minister of Russia? What is the larger thought behind it?
So the Kremlin justified this decision by making reference to the increasing role of the military in Russian GDP. It's approaching 7.5%, which is the figure it was in the mid-'80s. So they're effectively saying this is no longer a war of just the army. This is a war for the whole society and the whole economy. And that's why we need this technocratic figure who will bring innovation and which he arguably has done in isolating Russia from the damage caused by sanctions and allowing their military and industrial capacity to keep going. So I think this is probably bad news for Ukraine, probably bad news for the West, because it has shown that Russia is digging in and is willing to spend money and reorganize and change its tactics, or rather its strategy, to win this war.
Right, my last question to Mr. Jackson. Can we expect further shuffles or ousting in Russia?
I think in Russia, there are many, as it's referred to, unknown unknowns. Anything can happen. No one expected the Wagner rebellion with Evgeny Prigozhin marching on Moscow. Now that he is dead, we do not have another figure, wildcard figure quite like that. But I think we should always be watching Russia to be aware that, anything can happen. But I would say that this particular move, which came a month after the deputy defense minister was dismissed and after being arrested on corruption charges, after that, anything right now, I think we're seeing perhaps more stability being brought to the Russian war effort. And I think that's the focus on this. But it might not work out for Belousov. He might fall victim to Putin's whims. He might emerge as a potential challenger and need to be isolated. So the personnel question is very important here, especially for someone as notably paranoid as Vladimir Putin, who is careful about who he trusts. As deputy prime minister, I think Belousov has gained Putin's trust, but we never know what's going to happen next. So I would say watch this space.
Right. Thank you so much, Mr. Jackson, for taking our time and joining us here on WION with your insights.
Thanks for having me.